A woman kneels in the doorway of a converted restaurant on the edge of a lunar colony. She looks 19. She has ruled for 140 years. Her small blue hands are shaking. Somewhere in the corridor behind her, two guards drop to their knees on cold metal. Their fists strike their chests. They do not lift their heads. Inside, 42 small blue faces breathe in perfect sleep for the first time in months. A crib in the corner holds the smallest of them. She was almost a fourth grave. A man in a chef's apron stands 3 paces from the woman. He does not know who she is. He has been awake for 20 hours. He is holding out a slice of bread. His voice is quiet, almost tender. "Hey, you hungry too, sweetheart?" Her mouth trembles. She reaches for the bread, and the floor beneath his feet is about to become the fulcrum of the galaxy. The copper kettle had 11 credits in its register. Not 1,100. 11. Elias Brannock counted them twice, then a third time, because counting was something to do with his hands, and his hands needed something. Outside the scratched view screen, Earth hung crooked in the black. Blue, small, half hidden behind the communications tower they'd built 6 months ago, which nobody had asked for, which had killed the foot traffic on this side of Lunar City Stone dead. He set the coins down, picked up a rag, wiped the counter, wiped it again. The photo was still on the shelf above the register. He hadn't looked at it in 9 days. He knew because he'd been counting that too. Marin laughing. Their daughter Willa in her lap cheeks flushed from the sun, both of them wearing that yellow they used to love. The color of small things that grow in spring. Earth things, things that don't survive up here. 3 years next month. 3 years and he still couldn't say her name out loud in his own kitchen. He turned away from the shelf, pulled a piece of cardstock from under the counter, wrote in block letters with a black marker. "Closing soon. Thank you for your patience." Taped it to the door, then stood there. Just stood there. Because the taping had taken 30 seconds and there were still 11 hours left in the day. He was 35 years old. He had once been called the most promising young chef in the North Central Culinary Federation. He had once run a restaurant in Chicago that took reservations 6 months out. Now he ran a failing diner on the moon, and now he was closing it. He walked back behind the counter, sat on the stool, put his elbows on the counter and his head in his hands, breathed. He was still breathing when the door chime went. He hadn't oiled the sensor in a month. It sounded like a bird choking. It made him jump every time, especially now when the diner had been empty for 3 straight days. He turned. 3 small figures had come through the door, standing in a line, not moving. Elias forgot how to breathe for a second. They were children, or something children-shaped, blue skin, pale iridescent, faint patterns moving under the surface like light on water. Their eyes were the color of old coins, silver all the way through. No whites, no pupils. Valinor children. He remembered the name from the newscasts. Highly advanced species from somewhere near the galactic core. Never came to this side of Lunar City. Never came anywhere near the industrial strip. Certainly not 3 of them at once. Certainly not children. The tallest one stepped forward, maybe 4 feet high, wearing a plain gray jumpsuit that didn't quite fit her at the shoulders. A translation pendant hung around her thin neck, dull silver, chipped at one edge. "We have credits," she said. The pendant rendered her voice a beat late, slightly mechanical, feminine if he had to guess. She held up a standard galactic credit chip in her small 4-fingered hand. "We require sustenance." Elias opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Yeah." She waited. "Sorry." He wiped his hands on his apron, which were already clean, which didn't need wiping. "Welcome to the copper kettle. I can. Yeah, I can feed you." The tallest one looked back at the smaller 2. Some silent thing passed between them. Their patterns shifted, a ripple of color across their necks and cheeks that came and went so fast, Elias wasn't sure he'd seen it. The middle one, slightly shorter, slimmer, kept her gaze on the floor. The smallest one, the very smallest, couldn't have been taller than his hip. She was staring at the vintage jukebox in the corner like it was the second most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. We are unfamiliar with human cuisine, the tallest said. Right. Our physiology requires protein and complex carbohydrates. We avoid dairy and nightshades. Nightshades, tomatoes, peppers, any solanaceous plant. Elias blinked. You know a lot about plants for a... He stopped himself. Because they were children. Because you don't tell children they seem too smart for their age. Because he knew better than that. Or he used to. Give me 10 minutes. I've got chicken. I've got rice. I can do a vegetable medley without any tomato, no problem. The tallest one nodded once. A small, formal thing. That is acceptable. They chose the back booth, not the front one, which would have had the better view of the earth. The back one, tucked against the corner where the ventilator hummed, as if they were hiding. He didn't ask. He cooked. The chicken hissed against the flat top. He'd been cooking that same cut that same way for 20 years. Since culinary school. Since Chicago. Since before Marin, before Willa, before the accident, before the moon. The kitchen was the only place his hands remembered what to do without asking his head first. He plated it simply. Chicken breast sliced. Rice mounted neat in the center. Green beans and carrots on the side. A sprig of parsley he grew in a little hydroponic tray by the window because it was cheaper than importing it. He carried the plates out. The children were sitting very still. He set the plates down. Careful, it's hot. The tallest one picked up the fork, studied it, turned it slowly in her fingers like an artifact. Then very cautiously, spearing a small piece of chicken, she lifted it to her mouth. She chewed. Her eyes went wide. She closed them. And Elias felt something behind his ribs snap sideways. Willa used to close her eyes when she liked something. Really liked it. She'd close them and go very still, as if the taste was so good it needed her full attention. Marin used to laugh at her for it, called her their little food critic. He hadn't seen a child do that in 3 years. He turned around, walked back to the counter, picked up a rag, wiped something that didn't need wiping. Breathe, he told himself. Just breathe. Behind him, he heard the small one make a soft trilling sound. Delight, probably. The pendant didn't translate it. The tallest one spoke gentler now. It is pleasurable. The flavors are harmonious. Good, Elias said, not turning around. That's good. He didn't turn around for a full minute. By the time he did, the small one was already halfway through her plate, eating with a kind of focused hunger that told him she hadn't had a proper meal in a while. Not a while like a day. A while like weeks. He kept his voice easy. I'm Elias Brannock. What are your names? The tallest set down her fork, wiped her mouth with the napkin, precisely, like someone had once taught her exactly how and she'd never forgotten. I am Selene, she gestured. My sister Nereth, my brother Tamsu. Nereth, the middle one, still hadn't looked up. Tamsu, the smallest one, waved his four-fingered hand at Elias with rice still on his mouth. His eyes glittered. Nice to meet all of you, Elias said. Selene studied him. You did not ask what species we are. I know what species you are. You did not ask why we are here. None of my business. She tilted her head. It was a very human gesture, and very not. Something about the angle was off, slightly too sharp, slightly too still. Most humans ask. I'm not most humans. She looked at him for another long moment, then softly, that is why we came. He didn't ask what she meant by that either. They finished their food, every grain of rice, every bean. Selene took the napkin and folded it into a neat square when she was done. Nereth mirrored her exactly 1 beat later. Tamsu just licked his plate. Selene shot him a look that could have withered a stone. He put the plate down, guilty. Dessert, Elias asked. Tamsu's head snapped up so fast, Elias almost laughed. I have apples. I could make you something quick. Warm apples, a little honey, some crumble on top. Nothing fancy. The children conferred in that silent way again. Selene nodded. That would be acceptable. He made it in 12 minutes. Small ramekins. He'd invented the recipe himself back when Willa had gotten tired of pie crust and refused to eat anything with pastry for a solid summer. He'd worked around it. He'd worked around everything for that kid. He set the ramekins on the table. Tamsu made a sound this time that even the pendant couldn't handle. It came out through the translator as a soft crackle of static, and then a single word. Oh. Silen took a small spoonful, chewed slowly. Then, and Elias would think about this later, would turn it over in his head for weeks. She raised her gaze to his and said very quietly, "You cook the way someone taught you to, not the way you were taught." He didn't know what to say to that. He said nothing. She placed the credit chip on the table with a small, precise click. "We would like to return tomorrow." "Sure. Is that permitted?" "Kid, it's a diner, anyone can come." She looked at him for another beat. "Then we will return." They left in a small line. Silene first, Neereth second. Tamsu bringing up the rear, still glancing back at the jukebox as if he were leaving behind a friend he'd only just met. The chime bird choked. The door slid closed. The diner was empty again. Elias stood at the counter for a long time. Then he took the closing soon sign off the door, folded it in half, put it back under the counter. For tomorrow. Maybe. They came back the next day. And the next. And the next. By the fourth day, there were 5 of them. By the 6th, 7. By the end of the first week, Elias had learned 3 things. 1. Valinor children ate with a discipline that broke your heart if you watched too long. Every bite chewed twice. Every plate cleaned to shining. As if they'd been trained not to waste. 2. They loved sweet things with a fierce, quiet joy. Anything with fruit. Anything with honey. Tamsu had once made a sound that lasted a full 6 seconds when Elias put a warm peach in front of him. 3. They never came in with adults. Ever. He noticed the third thing the way you notice a draft. Slowly. Then all at once. By the end of the first week, Elias was cooking dishes he hadn't touched in years. Roasted chicken with root vegetables. His grandmother's stew, the one with the barley and the thyme. Fresh bread with honey butter. He caught himself humming while he plated. Actually humming. A song his mother used to sing while she chopped onions back in the old house in Chicago before the world got complicated. He stopped humming as soon as he noticed. Because noticing broke it. He'd hire someone he'd decided, just part-time, just to handle the counter during the lunch rush. Because there was a lunch rush now, he posted the notice on Wednesday, hired a kid named Ren Calloway on Thursday. Ren was 19, lunar born, bright red hair, freckles all the way down his forearms. He'd been trying to save up for a berth to Mars, said the words. Mars and berth, the way most people said vacation. And someday, he had one working overall and a laugh like a gate hinge. Elias liked him immediately. "Rule 1, Elias said, showing him the register. Never touch the flat top when I'm cooking." "Got it." "Rule 2, the kids in the back booth get whatever they want." Ren glanced through the pass. Neereth was pouring Tamsu a very careful glass of water, holding the pitcher with both hands, tongue between her teeth in concentration. The blue kids? Yeah, they allowed to just... Rule 2. Right, got it, no questions. Good kid. Ren learned fast. He didn't stare at the children. He said hello like they were regulars because they were. He learned Tamsu's name after the 2nd day, and Selene's after the 4th, and Neereth's after the 6th, because Neereth never spoke. Kareth showed up on day 9. He was the same size as Selenen, similar iridescent patterning. He came in behind them like a shadow, cautious, and only spoke when Silen prompted him. Elias figured he was a cousin, or something like it. He didn't ask. He fed him. He fed all of them. Every day, something new. Every day, a slightly bigger group. By day 11, there were 8 children in the back booth at lunchtime. By day 13-10, and every day they left with a bag. That was the part that started to itch. At first, Elias thought it was just leftovers. Kids at a diner. Kids who like the food. Sure, they take some home. Every parent in the history of the universe has said, put it in a container at some point. But by day 9, the bags were bigger. By day 11, Selene had asked very politely if he could prepare additional portions. 7, every day, for her friends who could not attend. Fine, he'd said. He'd started packing them in the morning. Extra chicken, extra bread, little jars of the apple crumble. By day 13, the additional portions had crept up. 9, then 11. Then one morning, Selene looked at him over the rim of her water glass and said, "Would 15 be possible?" He set the plate down slowly. 15 extra. Yes. For your friends. For those who cannot attend. The pendant said the words the same way. Calmly. Precisely. But Elias had been listening to that translated voice for 2 weeks now. He could hear the difference. Something underneath. Silene, how many friends are there? She held his eyes. Enough. Enough for what? She looked down at her plate, cut a small square of chicken, chewed slowly, didn't answer. Nerith, who never spoke, who never even lifted her eyes, raised her head, just once, just barely, then lowered it again. That was the moment the itch became something else. Elias began keeping small notes on his tablet, just observations. Not because he was investigating, because his hands needed something to do at night, and he'd never been able to sleep since Marin. Day 14, total children at lunch 9. Bag portions requested 17. Day 15, total children at lunch 6. Bag portions requested 19. Day 16, total children at lunch 11. Bag portions requested 22. By day 16, Elias was cooking for close to 30 invisible mouths every afternoon. He didn't understand where they were, and he didn't ask. Rule 2. He noticed other things too. Tamsu's cheeks, they were filling out. The hollows underneath were gone. Nyreth's shoulders had come down half an inch. Kareth had started laughing, a small, breathless sound the pendant didn't try to translate. Because how would you translate a laugh? In Silene. Silene, who never seemed to relax. Silene, who ate every bite with a soldier's discipline. Silene had one afternoon on day 15 leaned back in the booth and closed her eyes and let out a long, slow breath. Like a child. Just for a moment. Then she'd straightened up again, corrected herself, as if she'd remembered she wasn't allowed. Elias saw it. From behind the counter, he kept cooking, but his eyes stung a little. The itch got worse. He'd looked up Valenor's social structure on his tablet late at night. What little the human networks had. There wasn't much. Advanced species, rigid hierarchy, high technology, long lived by human standards, governed by a central council, rarely discussed off-world affairs with newer members of the Galactic Assembly. Nothing about children, nothing about lower-tier dependents, nothing about kids eating dispenser sludge in a warehouse while their parents argued about trade lanes. He shut the tablet. He didn't know that yet. Not any of it. He just knew there were 15 bags going out the door every afternoon, and that his diner smelled like bread and cinnamon for the first time in 3 years, and that when Tamsu came in the door in the morning, he sometimes ran. Just a little. Day 17. Silene came in alone. That was the first thing that was wrong. She had never come in alone. Not once. The chime bird choked. Elias looked up from the flat top. She was standing in the doorway, small, straight-backed, wearing the same gray jumpsuit as always. Nothing in her hands. "Where are the others?" he said. "They could not come today." "Are they all right?" She hesitated. "Yes." She walked to the counter, not the booth, the counter, climbed up onto the stool, set the credit chip down. "I would like to order the daily meal and," she paused, "the additional portions." "How many additional?" 31. Elias set down his spatula. "Silene." "Yes, 31. Yes. That's more than I've ever made in one." "I understand." He looked at her. She looked back. Her eyes were tired. There was a kind of tiredness he recognized. Not the tiredness of a child who has stayed up too late. The tiredness of a child who has been in charge of something too big. He'd seen that tiredness before. He'd seen it in the mirror the year Willa was sick. He turned off the flat top. Kid. Yes. Who are you feeding? Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, and then very quietly, almost too quiet for the pendant to catch, she said, "Those who are not in any records." The pendant translated it, but the words came out wrong, broken, as if it had trouble parsing what she'd meant. Elias stared at her. "What does that mean?" "It means what it says. Not in any records where—" She looked at him. She was 12, or the equivalent of 12, and her eyes were older than his. "In the assembly databases, in the Valinor delegation manifests, in the housing rolls, in the dispenser records. There are children on this moon, Elias Brannock, whose existence has not been formally acknowledged." The kitchen was very quiet. "How many?" he said. She was silent for a moment. Then 42. Elias put his hand flat on the counter. He kept it there. He needed to feel something solid. 42 children. Yes. Living where? I cannot tell you here. Being fed by. She looked at the bags of takeout he had lined up along the counter that morning. Ready to go. By you. He closed his eyes. He kept them closed for a full 3 seconds. When he opened them, Selene was still watching him. Small, solemn, waiting. "I'll cook the 31 portions," he said. "Thank you." "But Selene—" "Yes. You're going to have to tell me the rest. Soon." "I know. Not today, but soon." "I know." She climbed off the stool. She walked to the door. At the door, she paused and turned and looked at him with an expression he would remember for the rest of his life. "Elias Brannock." "Yeah, kid. You are the first adult who has ever asked." She left. The chime bird choked. Elias stood at the counter with his hands still flat on the surface. 22 years of restaurant kitchens behind him. 3 years of a widower's silence. In a single sentence from a 12-year-old alien child ringing in his ears like a struck bell. You are the first adult who has ever asked. He didn't sleep that night. He cooked instead. At 2 in the morning, he started the bread. At 4 in the morning, he braised chicken thighs in cider and thyme. At 6 in the morning, he baked 42 small pans of apple crumble, because he had done the math. And 42 was the number, and he was not going to leave anyone out. Ren came in at 7 and stopped in the doorway. Boss? Yeah. There's a lot of food. Yep. Like a lot. Yep. Are we? Rule 2. Right. Ren tied on his apron slowly. Rule 2. He didn't ask anything else. Elias liked him more every day. At 11:47 that morning, the door chime went. Elias looked up, expecting Selene. It wasn't Selene. The woman standing in the doorway was human. Late 30s, maybe, uniform, lunar security, gray and blue well-pressed. Her dark hair was cut short and functional. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't frowning. Her face was carefully neutral in a way that told Elias she was very good at her job. Her nameplate said Kestrel, Officer Delia Kestrel. Elias set down the ladle. Mr. Brannock. That's me. Officer Kestrel, Lunar Security Sector 6. She glanced around the empty diner. May I sit? Sure. She sat at the counter, directly across from him, slid off her cap and set it beside her elbow. We can skip the formalities. You know why I'm here. He wiped his hands on his apron, slowly. I'd rather you tell me. Her eyes flicked once to the row of insulated takeout bags lining the far end of the counter. 31 of them, back to his face. There are ongoing reports of significant Valinor minor traffic to this establishment. Unaccompanied, regular, high volume. They're customers. Mr. Brannock, they are. Unaccompanied Valinor minors in this quantity in a non-diplomatic sector of Lunar City constitute a diplomatic protocol issue. They just want lunch. She looked at him. Really looked at him. He couldn't read the look. There was something in it that wasn't procedural, something that wasn't the uniform. She reached into her interior jacket pocket, slowly, deliberately. Elias braced for a citation, a warrant, papers. What she pulled out was a small, worn photo. Physical, not digital, the kind almost no one printed anymore. She set it on the counter between them. Face up. Elias looked at it. Then he stopped breathing. Marin, younger, 20-something, standing in a dusty compound somewhere he didn't recognize, kneeling next to a little girl. Not Willa, a stranger, a skinny human girl, maybe 10 years old, dirty face, thin arms. Marin had her arm around the girl's shoulders, and she was laughing. That laugh he had known better than his own. That laugh he had not heard in 3 years and 11 days. His throat closed. He couldn't move. He couldn't ask. Officer Kestrel spoke very quietly. That's me when I was 10. Elias looked up at her. The tears came before he could stop them. He didn't even try. He just stood there, holding a dish towel in his fist, and let them come. I don't understand, he managed. Kepler Refugee Compound. 24 years ago, my parents didn't make it off the transit. Your wife was one of the volunteers who processed the orphans. She stayed with me for 11 days straight. She wouldn't leave until they found me a placement. She fed me. She read to me. She sang. Kestrel's voice caught. Just once. Just for a heartbeat. Then it steadied. She sang the same song every night until I could sleep. Elias couldn't speak. I've been on this moon 8 years, Mr. Brannock. I ran your name the moment your permit came through when you first opened. I saw who you were married to. I've been. She stopped, cleared her throat. I've been keeping a distant eye on this place, just in case. He shook his head. He didn't have words. Kestrel picked the photo back up, handled it like it was made of paper thinner than air. I don't know what you're doing with those bags. I don't know who the children are. I don't need to know. My report is going to say that I conducted a routine inspection of a small human-owned diner and found nothing of concern. Officer. Don't. He closed his mouth. She slid the photo back into her jacket, straightened her cap, put it back on, stood up. At the door she paused. Mr. Brannock. Yes. Your wife saved my life. She looked at him over her shoulder. So I owe your family one. She stepped through the doorway. The chime bird choked, and then she was gone. Elias stood at the counter for a long, long time. Ren came out of the back, drying his hands. Boss? Yeah. Are you crying? Yes. Do you want? Should I? No. Ren hesitated. Then he did something Elias would remember. He walked over, squeezed Elias's shoulder, just once, then walked back into the kitchen without another word. Rule 2. Rule 2 was that you didn't ask. Elias wiped his eyes on the corner of his apron. Then he went back to plating. The kids came at the usual time. All of them, all 9 that day. Silen at the head of the line, Neereth second, Kareth and Tamsu behind, and 5 others he had begun to know. Velen small and shy, Miro who had a habit of chewing on the edge of his sleeve, Aika and Pau close in size watching out for each other in a way that made Elias think of siblings, and Deshi, the oldest of the group at maybe 13. Quiet, watchful. They ate. They asked for their bags. Elias handed them the bags. When Silen reached for hers, he closed his hand over the handle. She looked up. Tonight, he said quietly. After close, take me to them. She held his gaze. For a long moment, he thought she was going to refuse. Then she nodded. Once. Small. After close. They left. Elias watched them go through the view screen. 9 small blue figures moving in a tight cluster down the corridor toward the public transport tubes. Silen's shoulders were rigid. As always, he locked up at 8. Told Ren he could go home. Ren looked at him. You all right, boss? Yeah. You sure? Yeah, kid, go home. Ren went. Elias waited by the door. At 8:14, Sileni came around the corner. Alone. Wearing a longer coat over her jumpsuit this time. She stopped in front of him. Follow me. Do not speak in the transit tubes. Do not look at any security cameras directly. Keep 3 paces behind me. Okay. If anyone approaches us, you are lost and I'm giving you directions. Okay. Elias Brannock. Yeah. You will not like what you see. I know. She started walking. He followed. They took 2 tubes, then a third. Then a maintenance corridor Elias didn't know existed, though he'd lived on this moon for almost 3 years. The lights in the corridor were harsher, cheaper, the kind Lunar City installed in places it didn't want anyone to look at closely. They walked for 11 minutes. They passed a service door with a faded sign that said, Storage Level 4B Non-Operational. A door that looked to any casual observer like it hadn't been opened in a decade. Silen stopped in front of it. She placed her small 4-fingered hand flat against a section of wall that appeared identical to every other section of wall. The wall shimmered. A concealed access panel slid open with a soft pneumatic hiss. Elias's mouth went dry. That was not standard Lunar City infrastructure. That was not standard anything. That was tech he had never seen before. Not in newscasts, not in the black market rumors, not in the wild speculation on the human networks. Sileni looked back at him. Come. He came. The door opened into a large, dim space that must once have been a storage bay. 200 square meters at least. Ventilation ducts running along the ceiling. Bare metal walls. Low blue-tinted lighting that made everything look underwater. And children. So many children. They were all standing. They had heard the door. Elias stopped just inside. He forgot to breathe. They ranged from tiny, waist-high, maybe smaller, up to teenagers taller than Selene. Most of them wore the same plain gray jumpsuits he had seen on Selene and her siblings. Some of them wore something even simpler. All of them had the same blue skin, the same silver gaze, the same iridescent patterning that shimmered faintly in the low light. Every single one of them was watching him. He counted without meaning to, without wanting to. He got to 20 and stopped. He couldn't do it. He couldn't reduce them to a number in his head. Not while they were looking at him like that. A teenage boy stepped forward from the back. Taller than the others, perhaps 16 equivalent. He wore a slightly more elaborate jumpsuit and carried himself with the stiff, exhausted authority of someone who has been in charge of something for far too long. He had a translation pendant like Selene's, chipped in the same way. He looked at Selene, then at Elias. Then he spoke. I am Dorvan. I am the primary caretaker. His pendant rendered his voice masculine, weary. You are the food provider. Elias Brannock. Sileni has told me your name. She has told me many things about you. Elias could not stop looking around the room. There was bedding along one wall, simple mats, stacked with military precision. A few storage crates arranged as makeshift furniture. A small nutrition dispenser in the corner, gray metal, blinking a slow red light that told Elias without any words at all that it was rationing. There were 42 children in this room, and there was one Dorvan, 16, caring for 42. Elias felt something in his chest give. How long, he said, and his voice came out rough. How long have you been here? Dorvan's gaze did not shift. 4 months and 11 days. 4. The negotiations were projected to last 3 lunar cycles. They have exceeded 7. Housing allocations were prioritized for high-tier personnel and their immediate dependents. We were designated as, he searched for the human word, overflow. Overflow. Yes, your children. We are the children of service-tier personnel, kitchen attendants, waste processors, ventilation crew. Our parents work in the assembly complex. They cannot leave their posts. They know you're here. They know we are being cared for. By whom? Dorvan looked at him steadily. By me. Elias closed his eyes. He opened them. The children were still watching him. Some of them were very small. Very, very small. He saw one crouched between two older ones who couldn't have been more than the equivalent of 3 or 4. She was clutching the leg of a bigger child, half hidden, only her small face visible. How have you been feeding them? Elias said. The dispenser, basic nutritional cubes, enough to prevent malnutrition. Dorvan's voice was flat. For the first 3 months. Then Sileni began bringing your food. That's why the portions kept going up. Yes. Why didn't you tell me sooner? We could not risk it. Risk what? Dorvan looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, something in the teenager's exhausted face broke just slightly. If you had known and you had refused, we could not have come back. We had one attempt, Selene said. He stopped. She said you were the only human who did not ask questions. Elias put his hand flat against the doorframe. He needed something solid again. Behind Dorvan, the tiny child who had been half hiding suddenly detached from the older child's leg. She was very small, barely as tall as Elias's hip. She took one hesitant step forward, then another. Then she was running. She crossed the room in 6 quick steps and slammed into Elias's leg with the full force of a child who has never learned to be careful with adults. Both her small 4-fingered hands wrapped around his knee, her forehead pressed against his thigh. And she said in a voice muffled by his apron, in a small voice choked with something that might have been relief, or might have been exhaustion, or might have been the first safe breath she had taken in months. She said one word. The pendant she wore was cracked. It rendered the word twice, once in her own melodic clicking, and once in a translation. Fathai. The pendant paused, struggled, tried again. Father. The room went utterly still. Elias did not move, could not move. Somewhere in the back of the room, an older child made a small, sharp sound of surprise. Dorvan's face did something complicated. Sileni behind him went very still, her pattern shifting in a way Elias could not read. The tiny child did not let go of his leg. She did not look up. She just held on. Elias lowered his hand slowly and placed it on top of her small head. Her skin was warm. Her hair was fine and soft and blue. She smelled faintly of the apple crumble he had made that morning. He did not know her name. He did not know how she had learned that word. He did not know how a 4-year-old alien child could look at a human stranger and reach for the word for father. He only knew that his eyes had filled with tears again, and that he was not going to let go. He knelt down. The child, without letting go of his leg, allowed him to do it, adjusting her grip so that when he reached the floor, she was standing very small in the circle of his arms. Not hugging, just present, small and blue and warm and alive. He looked up. 41 others were watching him, waiting. Dorvan stepped forward. His voice when he spoke was very quiet. What will you do, Elias Brannock? Elias looked around the room, the bedding, the rationing dispenser blinking red, the mats laid in rows, the small teenager with tired eyes who had been running this place for 4 months and 11 days without any adult to notice, the 42 children, the tiny one holding his leg. He thought about the 11 credits he had counted in his register 3 weeks ago. He thought about the closing soon sign folded under the counter. He thought about Marin, about Willa, about the way Sileni had closed her eyes at her first bite of chicken, about the way Wren had squeezed his shoulder without asking a single question, about Officer Kestrel's photograph. He thought about the last 3 years, the ones he had spent barely holding on, cooking meals for empty booths and wiping counters that didn't need wiping, waiting for something he could not name. Maybe this was what he had been waiting for. He looked at Dorvan. He kept his voice steady. Tomorrow, 6 in the morning, I'll bring breakfast for all 42 of you. Proper breakfast, hot food, enough for everyone. Dorvan stared at him. You will. Yes. For all of us. For every single one. And the day after. Every day after. Silen behind Dorvin made a small sound. The pendant did not translate it. It didn't need to. The tiny child in Elias's arms tightened her grip. Dorvin closed his eyes. For the first time since Elias had walked into that warehouse, the teenager looked exactly what he was. 16. Exhausted. 16 and exhausted, and for perhaps the first time in his life, not alone. When he opened his eyes again, there was something in them Elias had not seen before. It was very small. It was very fragile. But it was there. It was hope. Then we will be ready, Dorvin said. Elias nodded. He picked up the small child in his arms. She weighed almost nothing. She nestled against his shoulder as if she had done it 100 times before. He looked out at the 42 faces watching him, at the blinking red light of the rationing dispenser, at Silen small and straight-backed and holding her breath. He thought without meaning to of Willa, of the way she used to close her eyes when the food was good, of the promise he had made to her in the hospital room 3 years ago, the one he had not been able to keep, the one about being there tomorrow morning to make her pancakes. He tightened his arms around the small child he did not know. He said it very quietly, just to himself, just barely moving his lips. Tomorrow, sweetheart. Tomorrow. Elias set his alarm for 3 in the morning. He didn't need it. He was already awake. He had been awake since he'd walked out of that warehouse the night before, carrying the smell of 42 children on his clothes. The tiny one's warmth still on his shoulder. The words she'd said still ringing in his ears. Fathai. Father. He stood in his kitchen at 2:47, coffee in his hand, the overhead light on, and he made a list. 42 portions of oatmeal, with apple cinnamon brown sugar, 42 hard-boiled eggs, 42 slices of bread, butter, honey, enough milk substitute for all of them warmed. Because he had checked the xenobiological database again at midnight, and the smallest ones could tolerate soy but not dairy. He read the list back to himself. Then he added extra. Always extra. In case. He turned on the burners. By 4, he was rolling out biscuit dough because he decided mid-batch that oatmeal wasn't enough. Kids needed something to hold in their hands. Something warm, something that felt like breakfast should feel. By 5, Ren let himself in. The kid stopped in the doorway, looked at the counter, looked at Elias. Boss? Yeah, there is. Are we feeding an army? Something like that? Okay. Ren tied on his apron, washed his hands, walked over to the counter and picked up a knife. Where do you want me? That was all he said. Elias's throat did that thing again, that closing thing, which he was not going to do right now because he had biscuits in the oven and 42 children who needed feeding, and he did not have time. Slice the apples, thin, all of them. On it. They worked in silence for 90 minutes. By 6:30, the food was packed into insulated crates. 6 of them. Stacked on the small cargo dolly Elias had bought last year to haul supplies from the freight bay. Ren helped him load it. Ren did not ask where he was taking it. Ren Elias was beginning to understand the finest human being on this moon. You're covering the diner till 11. Got it. If Kestrel comes in, she won't ask questions. How did you know? Ren shrugged. Rule 2. Elias laughed. It came out of him in a short, cracked bark that surprised them both. He hadn't laughed in a while. He pushed the dolly out the door. He took the maintenance corridor Selene had shown him. He was careful. He kept his head down. He did not look at the security cameras. 11 minutes later, he was at the door. He pressed his hand flat against the section of wall Selene had touched. Nothing happened. Right. He didn't have the biometric key. He stood there feeling stupid for about 6 seconds before the door slid open on its own. Dorvin was standing on the other side. The teenager looked at the crates, looked at Elias. He did not smile. Valinor faces did not do smiling the way humans did, but his patterns shifted, just slightly, just at the edges, a gentler color. You came. I said I would. Many humans say, I'm not many humans. Dorvin stepped aside. Elias pushed the dolly into the warehouse, and that was when the sound started. 42 children, waking up, sitting up on their mats, sleepy eyes going from heavy to fully open in the space of half a second when they smelled the food. Small sounds. Trilling clicking the soft chirps of Valinor children, not yet awake enough to remember to be disciplined about it. The tiny one from last night, the one who had called him father. She was already standing. She had been standing since he had walked in. She ran to him. He caught her. He set the dolly down and lifted her up because his arms remembered how before his head could tell them to stop. She wrapped her small, four-fingered hands around his neck and pressed her cheek to his and did not say a word. He didn't ask her name. Not yet. He would, but not yet. Dorvin cleared his throat. You have prepared food for all of us. Yeah. How? Elias set the child down. She stayed, right against his leg, same as last night. I got up early. Elias Brannock. Yeah. You got up early. Yeah. Dorvin looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned to the room and clicked out something in Valinor, and the children began to line up, by themselves, without being told twice. 42 children, some barely able to walk, in a neat line in silence waiting. Elias started plating. He served them one at a time. He looked each of them in the eye when he did it. He said good morning. He didn't know if the pendants would translate it right or if any of them would understand him. He said it anyway. They ate. They ate the way Selene had eaten that first day at the diner, which is to say quietly, carefully, with a discipline that broke his heart if he watched too long. But by the time the third child had taken her first bite, something in the room had shifted. The little ones were making the trilling sound. The ones just old enough to know better were pretending they weren't. Deshi, the 13-year-old, watched over the little ones like a soldier off duty. Kareth kept looking at Elias like he was trying to memorize him. Silene stood at the back with her arms folded across her chest, watching. She did not eat. She waited until every single child had a plate. Then she took one for herself. Elias watched her carry it to a mat in the corner, sit down, cross her legs, and begin to eat slowly the way a soldier eats after a long march, because she had to, because there was work still to do. He looked at Dorvin. Dorvin was leaning against the wall, not eating. Dorvin? Yes. You too. After. Now. After. Dorvin. The teenager looked at him. Elias walked over, handed him a plate. You've been on duty 4 months and 11 days. Yes. You've earned an hour off. Dorvin looked at the plate. Elias saw the exact moment, the exact half second, when something in the teenager cracked. Not broke, cracked. A small hairline fracture in whatever fortress he had been living in. Dorvin took the plate. He sat down. He ate. And Elias walked away because he had learned somewhere along the way that you don't watch a person cry when what they need is dignity. The tiny one followed him. He turned around, knelt down. What's your name, sweetheart? She hesitated. Then small and clear she said something the pendant rendered as Elia. Elia. He nodded. Nice to meet you, Elia. She reached for his hand. He let her take it. 2 weeks passed. He didn't sleep more than 4 hours a night. He didn't need to. Every morning at 3 he got up. Every morning at 6 he loaded the cart. Every morning at 6:30 he wheeled it through the maintenance quarter. Every morning at 7 he served 42 children breakfast. Then he went back to the diner, opened at 11, worked lunch. Silene and her siblings and the 7 or 8 other children came in the middle of the day, same as always, because they still needed to keep up appearances for anyone watching the diner. Sometimes Officer Kestrel came in, ordered a coffee, sat for exactly 9 minutes, never spoke, left a generous tip. Elias closed the diner at 8, went back to the warehouse, served dinner, stayed until 9, came home, prepped for the next morning, slept a few hours, started over. He had never worked this hard in his life. He had never been this alive. He noticed things. Tamsu's cheeks, they were filling out. Deshi. He had started laughing. Not big laughs, small breathy ones, but laughs. Elia, her fine blue hair, it had started to grow. It hadn't been growing before. There were parents in this warehouse he had never met and had heard about only in fragments, and one of them was going to walk in one day and see their little girl with hair that reached her shoulders instead of stopping at her ears, and they were not going to understand what had happened. He noticed Dorvin, the teenager, the one who had been running the whole thing alone for 4 months. He watched Dorvin learn how to laugh again. It started on day 9. Elias was teaching him to make bread. Because there were 42 children and Elias couldn't bake all the bread himself, and also cook everything else, and also run a diner and also sleep occasionally. So he had said one morning at 6, Dorvin, come here. He showed him how to feel the dough, not measure it, feel it. He put Dorvan's 4-fingered hand on the surface, told him to press down with the heel of his palm, to fold, to turn a quarter, to press again. Dorvan tried. He was not good at it. His hands were not designed for kneading in quite the same way. His first attempt was flat. His second was dense. His third was worse than the first 2. His fourth split down the middle like a bad seam. He kept trying. Elias watched him without correcting him, which was, Elias would think about this later, one of the more important choices he had made as a teacher, because Dorvin had been corrected his entire life. Corrected for angle, for pressure, for inefficiency, for the crime of being serviced here and existing in space at all. Elias let him fail. He let him fail because failure was the thing Dorvin had never been given permission to do. On day 9 of the 2 weeks, Dorvin looked up from the counter flour, dusting his cheekbones, and said in his flat, translated voice, "This is inefficient." "Yeah, I have been on this task for 1.4 hours. "Yep. I have produced 2 loaves. Both are of insufficient quality. Baking's not efficient, it's just bread." Dorvin stared at him. "But food should be efficient." "Says who?" "Says." Dorvin paused. His pendant made the small clicking sound it made when it was translating a concept it wasn't sure about. "Says our tier training. Nutrition is a metric. Efficient distribution is a virtue." Elias set down the towel. He looked at the 16-year-old alien in his kitchen. "Dorvin, yes. Nutrition is a metric. That's true. Feeding people is not. I do not understand. Feeding people is what you do because you love them, which is not efficient, which is why it means anything." Dorvin looked at the loaf of bread he had made, the bad one, his 3rd attempt. Then he looked at Elias, and Elias would remember this, because it was the moment he understood that this boy had never in his life been taught by an adult who liked him. Dorvin made a sound, a soft, breathy sound. The pendant did not try to translate it, because it was a laugh. It was Dorvin, 16, laughing at his own bad bread. Elias turned away and made himself very busy at the sink, because his eyes were doing that thing again. The lesson didn't stop that day. Elias kept teaching him, every morning, for 20 minutes before the breakfast delivery. He showed him how to test water temperature by dropping a pinch of yeast in it and waiting for it to bloom. He showed him how to score the top of a loaf with a razor so it wouldn't tear as it rose. He showed him the trick his grandmother had used, which was to add 1 extra minute to whatever the recipe said, because ovens lie. Dorvin learned. By day 11, he was making bread that was actually eatable. By day 13, he was making bread that was almost good. On day 14, he made a small loaf and cut it in half and gave 1/2 to Elia, who was too small to reach the counter. She held it in both hands and looked up at him with silver eyes shining and said something the pendant rendered as "Thank you, brother." Dorvin turned away from her, fast, so she wouldn't see his face. Elias saw it. Elias didn't say anything, but Elias would remember for a long time after the sight of a 16-year-old boy who had been in charge of 41 lives for 4 months and 11 days, learning what it was to be given credit for something small and warm and shaped like a loaf of bread. The children began to know him, really know him, not just the food provider. Elias, Fathai to Ilya, Elias Brannock to Selene, just Elias to Tamsu, who had started tugging at his apron whenever he passed. Because Tamsu Elias had figured out had touch hunger. The kid needed to be near him, so Elias made himself easy to be near. He carried Ilya on his hip while he served porridge. He let Tamsu stir the pot while he explained the recipe. He taught Deshi how to test if bread was done by tapping the bottom of the loaf. He listened to Naireth, because Naireth had started to speak. She had started speaking in the second week, just barely, only to Elias, only in whispers, only when the others could not hear. She would come to him while he was plating and stand at his elbow and say something so quiet the pendant almost couldn't catch it. About her mother, whom she had not seen in 38 days. Her mother worked in the assembly complex. Naireth did not know exactly where. She only knew that her mother had told her the last time they had seen each other that Naireth was to be brave. And Naireth had been brave for 38 days, and she was so tired. Elias did not tell her to stop being brave. He listened. He kept plating. He listened. Sileni. Sileni stayed a little apart. She helped. She organized. She translated when the little ones didn't understand something. She did not call him anything. She just watched him, like she was waiting for something. Elias didn't push her. He just kept cooking. Day 12 of the 2 weeks, something happened. It was 3 in the morning. He was in his kitchen, prepping, the overhead light on, and someone knocked at the diner's back door. Elias went still. Nobody knocked at 3 in the morning. He walked over, cracked the door. Officer Kestrel stood on the other side, out of uniform, civilian jacket, hair down. She looked younger like that. She looked tired. Delia. Elias. He opened the door. She stepped in. She was carrying a bag. She set it on his counter. He opened it. Bread, a pound of butter, 2 dozen eggs, a jar of honey, a packet of dried apples, a small hand-labeled bag of coffee, personal groceries, from her rations. Delia, don't say anything. I don't. He closed his mouth. She looked at him. You're not sleeping. I'm sleeping. You look like hell. That's a technical term. She almost smiled. She almost, then didn't. How many kids? 42. How? Long story. How much money is this costing you? I have. He stopped because he was going to say he had savings, which was a lie, which she would see through immediately. She just looked at him, waited. I have enough for now. Enough for how long? I don't know. Elias. I don't know. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her jacket, pulled out a small chip, set it on the counter. That's from my savings, anonymous. My name isn't on it. I've made sure it isn't traceable. Delia, no. Yes. You barely. I said yes. I can't. You can. She met his eyes. You will, because there are 42 children, and you are one man, and I am not going to stand in a warehouse and watch a room full of children go hungry because a grown man's pride got in the way. He closed his hand around the chip. He nodded. He couldn't speak. She put her hand on his forearm, just for a second. Then she turned and left. The door clicked shut behind her. Elias stood at his counter at 3 in the morning holding a credit chip that Delia Kestrel had probably drained her savings account to give him. And he thought about his wife. And he thought about a 10-year-old refugee girl sleeping through her nightmares because a stranger sang her the same song for 11 nights. He thought, I never really knew you, Marin. Did I? I lived with you for 8 years, and I never really knew all of who you were. He wiped his face on his sleeve. He went back to prep. Day 15. Something else happened. something bigger. At 3:55 in the afternoon, when he was closing up the diner between lunch and the evening warehouse run, a large deposit hit his account. The notification pinged on his tablet. He looked at it. He looked at it again. The number had a lot of zeros. The number was enough to keep the diner running for 11 months. The source was untraceable, encrypted, routed through the assembly complex's private banking system. Elias sat down on a stool. He stared at the tablet. Sileni walked in for her afternoon check-in 10 minutes later. She saw his face. Elias Brannock. Sileni, are you unwell? He turned the tablet around, showed her. She looked at it. Her patterns went absolutely still, which he had learned was Valinor for oh no. Sileni. Yes. Did you do this? I do not have access to funds of this magnitude. Then who? She was quiet, too quiet. Sileni. I do not know. Silen. I do not. She was lying. He could see it. He didn't know how he could see it, but he could. He set the tablet down. Kid. Yes. Someone is watching this diner. Yes. Someone has been watching for a while. Yes. You know who. Silen, look at me. She looked at him. Her eyes were huge. I don't know who, she said. I suspect, but I do not know. Who do you suspect? I cannot say. Silenin. Elias Brannock. Please, if I am wrong, it would be dangerous. He looked at her. She was 12. He was 35. She was carrying more than she should be. He didn't push. Okay, kid. Thank you. But if you find out, you tell me. Yes. She turned to go. At the door, she stopped. She looked back at him. Elias Brannock. Yeah. The person who deposited those funds. Yes. They have been watching for at least 3 weeks. 3. I believe so. She left. Elias sat on the stool for a very long time, watching a diner full of nobody, feeling watched. 2 days later, the man in the silver uniform walked into the copper kettle. Elias knew immediately. The way the man walked, the way he did not look at the menu, the way he sat down at the counter without asking and adjusted the cuff of his sleeve and folded his hands in front of him. This was not a customer. The man's skin was blue, iridescent. His hair was dark, long, braided down his back in an elaborate way that Elias had never seen on Silen or any of the other children. He wore a uniform of interlocking metallic plates. A pin on his shoulder marked him as high tier. He was in his 40s maybe, something like that. It was hard to tell with Valinor. His pendant was not chipped. His pendant was solid gold. Are you the food provider, Elias Brannock? I'm Elias, yeah. I am Praetor Odrek, attaché to the second-tier delegation. Nice to meet you. Odrek did not respond to the pleasantry. Odrek smiled instead. It was not a nice smile. I have been observing your establishment. Okay. For some time. Okay. You have been engaged in the unauthorized care of Valinor minors. Their customers. Do not insult me. All right then. Mr. Brannock, I will not be coy. You have been operating an unregistered dependent care operation involving 42 Valinor children. You have been receiving substantial financial transfers from an unknown source, and you are, according to human records, a widower. Elias went very still. A widower, who has since his wife and daughter's deaths lived alone, operated an unsuccessful business, made no other significant social connections. Get to the point. The point, Mr. Brannock, is that a certain narrative writes itself, a grieving human, a collection of orphan children, a pattern of unsupervised access, substantial unexplained funding, perhaps. Odrek made a small dismissive gesture. Perhaps a filling of a psychological void. Elias closed his hands into fists. Slowly, deliberately. Odrek saw it. Odrek smiled wider. You understand my point. I understand you're a piece of. Careful. Elias stopped. Because the man was Valinor. Because the man had diplomatic immunity. Because if Elias hit him, it would end everything. And Elias had learned to control that impulse a long time ago, even when it was harder than it should have been. You have no proof of anything you're implying. I have witnesses to Valinor minor traffic at this establishment. I have documentation of the financial transfers. I have testimony from delegation personnel that will corroborate the caretaker Dorvan's presence. Delegation personnel. I have been building this case for 2 weeks. You son of a... Mr. Brannock. Odrek leaned forward. I am not accusing you today. I am giving you a warning. You will cease all contact with these children. You will refuse them entry to this establishment. You will not visit the warehouse. How do you know about the... You have 24 hours to comply. Or what? Or the case I have built will be filed, not with Lunar Security, with the Assembly Ethics Council, which will not be interested in your grief or your intentions. They will only be interested in whether a lone human male has been. Odrek paused. Cultivating unsupervised access to alien children. Elias could not breathe. He wanted to hit him. He wanted to hit him so badly his hands shook. Odrek stood, straightened his sleeve. 24 hours, Mr. Brannock. Do the right thing. He walked out. The chime bird choked behind him. Elias stood behind the counter for 1 minute, then another. Then he walked into the back room and threw a plate against the wall. Ren came running from the kitchen. Boss? Get out. Are you? Get out. Ren backed out slowly. Elias put his head down on the prep counter, his forehead against the cold metal. He breathed in, out, in, out. He was not going to comply. He was not going to stop. He was going to keep feeding them. But he was one man, and they had built a case, and if the Ethics Council heard even a whisper of the story, Odrek was ready to tell. He picked up his tablet with hands that were still shaking. He wrote a single message. He sent it to Silenim. Tell Dorvan to be ready to move. Silen's reply came in 3 minutes. Move where? He didn't have an answer. He didn't have an answer for 6 hours. At 9 that evening, he still didn't have an answer. At 9:17, Ilya went into medical distress. The message came from Dorvan directly. Tamsu and Ilya both sick. Tamsu stable. Ilya critical. Nutritional shock. Help. Elias didn't read the second sentence. He was already running. He took the maintenance corridor at a sprint. His knees didn't like it. His lungs didn't like it. He didn't care. He was 50 seconds into a 9-minute run when it hit him. Nutritional shock. He didn't know what that meant in Valinor children. He knew what it meant in humans. When a body that has been running on inadequate nutrition suddenly gets adequate nutrition and then loses it. When the metabolism panics. He'd been feeding them for 2 weeks. Their bodies had adjusted upward, and Odrek's threat had scared him enough. That afternoon, that he had without thinking, without meaning to cut the evening portion. He'd only brought lighter fare to the warehouse for dinner, because he'd been panicking, because he'd been thinking, what if I have to stop tomorrow? I'd better make it a slower decline. I'd better. He'd made it a shock. He'd done this. He got to the door, pressed his hand against the wall. Dorvan had reprogrammed the panel to recognize him 3 days ago. The door opened. He ran through. Ilya was on a mat in the center of the room. The other children were pulled back, silent, watching. Her small body was very still. Her lips were pale. Her small, four-fingered hands were curled loosely at her sides. She was breathing, but barely. Dorvan was kneeling next to her. His face was gray. Elias. How long? 20 minutes. Tamsu. Stable. He is older, larger reserves. Is anyone else? 2 more showing symptoms. Get me your medical supplies. Dorvan brought them. Elias didn't know Valinor medicine, but he knew nutrition. He knew a child's body. He tore open a nutrition packet, mixed it with water, slowly, cold, not warm. Because warm expanded blood vessels, and this child needed her blood to stay where it was. He knelt down. He lifted Ilya's head. He dripped the mixture between her small blue lips. One drop, then another. Come on, drop. Come on, sweetheart. Drop. You called me father. Drop. You called me father, kid. You don't get to leave now. She swallowed. It was small, but it was a swallow. Elias almost dropped her. He kept going. Drop, drop, drop. 6 minutes later, her eyelids fluttered. 10 minutes later, she opened her eyes. 12 minutes later, she looked at him. Confused, small, and said in her tiny, cracked voice, Fatai. Elias put his forehead against hers. He stayed there for a long time. When he lifted his head, Dorvan was staring at him. You knew. What? How to do that? I'm a chef. I know bodies. I know what food does. I know what happens when it goes away. You saved her. She's not out of it yet. You saved her. Elias looked at Dorvan. The teenager's eyes were wet. Dorvan? Yes. How long has this been happening? What? Kids getting sick. Dorvan was quiet. Dorvan, 2 months since the food shortages began. How many? 12 since I have been here. How many made it? Dorvan looked at him. 9. Elias closed his eyes. 9. 3 did not. 3 small children had died in this warehouse. On this teenager's watch, while the assembly complex negotiated trade lanes. He couldn't speak for a moment. Then he said very quietly, We're moving them. Tonight. All of them. Somewhere I can be with them full time. Somewhere they eat as much as they need. Elias, where? I don't know yet. Elias. I don't know yet, but we are not staying here. He carried Ilya himself, wrapped in a blanket. She was awake now, sleepy, small, her cheek against his shoulder, her small hand fisted in the fabric of his shirt. He led the way to the door. He opened it. He stepped through into the corridor. He stopped, because the corridor was not empty. Praetor Odrek was standing at the far end, 2 other Valinor in silver uniforms behind him. Odrek smiled. Mr. Brannock, I am disappointed. Elias's arms tightened around Ilya. Get out of my way. You had 24 hours. Get out of my way, Odrek. I'm afraid I cannot. What I can do is escort you back to the storage bay, and these children will be returned to their proper accommodations while the assembly reviews the matter. They don't have proper accommodations. That is not my concern. Kids are dying in there. Odrek's gaze flickered. That is unfortunate. Unfortunate. But it is not a matter for a human food provider to. The corridor door behind Odrek slid open. Officer Kestrel walked through, in uniform, armed. Behind her, 4 other lunar security officers, human, also armed. Odrek turned. His smile did not falter. Officer, this is a diplomatic matter. I disagree. Valinor jurisdiction extends to. Save it. Kestrel walked past him. She kept her eyes on Odrek, but she was moving toward Elias. Mr. Brannock. Delia. Is the child stable? For now. Are there more inside? 41. Kestrel turned to Odrek. You have a diplomatic complaint. File it. In the meantime, my officers and I are conducting a health and safety inspection, which we are legally entitled to do in any lunar city structure showing signs of medical distress. You cannot. I can. I am. This is not up for debate. Odrek looked at the lunar security officers, looked at Elias, looked at Ilya. Ilya in Elias's arms opened her eyes. She looked directly at Odrek. Her small, four-fingered hand tightened on Elias's collar. Odrek, for the first time, looked something other than smug. He looked for a fraction of a second uncertain. Then he composed himself. This is not over. Take that up with the Ethics Council, Kestrel said. I will. Do. Odrek turned. His two silver uniformed men turned with him. They walked back down the corridor. The door slid shut behind them. Kestrel exhaled. Elias. Delia, thank you. Don't thank me yet. How did you? Ren called me. Ren. Said you looked terrible when you left the diner. Said something was very wrong. Said if I trusted you at all, I should get down here. He said the word please twice. Elias closed his eyes. The kid, the 19-year-old kid who was saving up for a berth to Mars, was going to get a raise. If Elias could ever afford to give him one. Kestrel put her hand on Elias's shoulder. Now what? They need somewhere else, somewhere warmer, somewhere with real beds, somewhere I can be there, every meal, every day. You have somewhere in mind. He had been thinking about it for 6 hours. He had thought about the empty restaurant space 2 blocks from the diner, the old one, vacant 9 months, owner desperate. I do. How fast can you set it up? I already made the call. She looked at him. When? An hour ago, when Odrek left, I called the owner. I told her it was urgent. I told her I'd pay in cash tonight. Can you afford? I got a large deposit last week from an unknown source. She almost smiled. Well, yeah, then let's move them. They moved them in 3 trips. Kestrel's team ran interference on the surveillance cameras. Ren showed up with the diner's transport van and did not ask a single question. Dorvin carried the smallest ones. Silen organized the older ones into groups. Elias carried Elia the whole time. By midnight 42, Valinor children were sleeping in real beds. In a former restaurant space with warm lights and a working kitchen and a bathroom with actual running water. Elias stood in the doorway of the dormitory area they had improvised out of the private dining rooms. He looked at the little bodies curled up under real blankets. Ilya was in a crib he had bought in a panic at midnight from a supply depot that had thankfully been open. She was asleep, really asleep. Selene stood beside him. Elias Brannock. Selene. You have done a thing that, Selene, that I cannot describe. You don't have to. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said so softly he almost missed it. My mother would want to know. He turned his head. Your mother. She looked up at him. Her eyes were huge in the low light. My mother has been occupied with assembly matters. She does not know we are here. Silene. I have been trying to tell her, through official channels. She has been busy. How busy is Elias Brannock? Silene swallowed. There is something I have not told you. His stomach dropped. What? She looked at her small, 4-fingered hands. I sent her something 2 weeks ago. A drawing. A drawing of what? Of you. Cooking. Okay. With writing on it. What did it say? Selene looked up at him. It said, there is a man on the moon who remembers we are hungry. The room was very quiet. Elias could hear Ilya breathing in her crib. He could hear his own heartbeat. Silene. Yes. Who is your mother? She held his eyes. She did not answer. The front door of the makeshift shelter opened. The private door, the one Elias had locked. That should not have been able to open without a key. It opened anyway. A woman walked through. She looked like a girl. She looked like she was 20 years old. 20 at the outside. Blonde hair. Almost white in the low light. Not quite silver. Pale gold like winter wheat falling loose around her shoulders. Porcelain skin. A young face. A face that could have belonged to any beautiful young woman on any street in any city. Her cheekbones were high, her mouth was soft, her eyes were silver, all silver. No whites, no pupils. Valinor. She wore a simple traveling cloak over civilian clothes. No entourage, no guards. Alone. She stopped in the doorway. She saw the room full of sleeping children. Her hand came up to her mouth. Elias, exhausted, running on 20 hours awake, and adrenaline and grief and rage, saw her small figure and her young face, and the shock in her eyes, and thought, another one, another lost kid. He walked over, his footsteps quiet on the makeshift carpet. Elias sleeping in a crib 9 feet away. He stopped in front of the young woman. He looked down at her. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. He kept his voice soft. He didn't want to wake the children. He said gently, the way you speak to a child who has come in from the cold. Hey, you hungry too, sweetheart? I've got bread in the back. He held out his hand. The blonde girl. The very young-looking blonde girl with silver eyes and skin like porcelain, made a sound, a small, broken sound. And then behind him from the direction of the corridor, he heard the click of boots against the floor. He heard 2 sharp intakes of breath. He heard 2 bodies drop to their knees. Elias turned around. 2 Valinor in ceremonial silver gold trim on their collars. Not Odrek's kind. Higher, older, their heads bowed, their fists against their chests. He heard Sileni behind him, her small voice. Fathai. He turned back around. The blonde girl, the young-looking woman, was staring at him. Tears were running down her cheeks. She said in a voice that was completely her own, not a translation pendant, her own throat, her own accent. Elias Brannock. He swallowed. You know Sileni is my daughter. The floor did something strange under his feet. His stomach did something stranger. Yes. He looked at Silen, small, 12, watching him with the same shape of eye, the same color, the same everything as the woman in front of him. He looked back at the young woman, the very young-looking woman, whose face was blurred with tears, who could not have been more than 20, who was somehow. You are. His voice came out cracked. You are her mother. Yes. Who are you? She lifted her chin. The tears kept falling. She did not wipe them away. She was crying the way people cry when they have been holding something inside for a very long time. My name is Araya Vess. Okay, I am the Supreme Counselor of the Valinor Concordat. Elias's hand was still held out. He had been offering bread. He couldn't feel his hand. Yes? Sileni's mother. Yes? Yes? You rule. Yes. He looked at her again, at her young face, at the tears running down her cheeks, at the hand that still hovered at her mouth. She looked 20. She could not be 20. She could not possibly be 20. She was the ruler of an interstellar civilization, and she was standing in the doorway of a converted restaurant crying at the sight of her own daughter sleeping in a proper bed. Elias's hand was still out. He didn't know what to do with it. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it. I offered you bread. I know. I know what you thought. He stared at her. She stared at him. The 2 ceremonial guards behind him were still on their knees. Sileni, small in the corner, took a step forward, then another, her gaze fixed on her mother. Mama. Araya's face broke. She held out her arms. Silene walked into them, and Araya, the Supreme Counselor of the Valinor Concordat, sank to the floor of a makeshift shelter in a converted restaurant at the edge of Lunar City and held her 12-year-old daughter as if she had been drowning for a very long time and had finally reached the surface. Elias stood there. He didn't move. Elia in her crib stirred in her sleep, made a small sound. He walked over to the crib, on instinct, without thinking. He looked in. She was fine, just dreaming. Her small blue face was peaceful. He reached down, adjusted her blanket. He heard a ray on the floor behind him whisper against her daughter's hair. In Velinor, something the pendants would never translate right. Something that he understood without needing to be told an apology. He straightened. He turned around. Araya was looking at him over Selene's shoulder. Her eyes were still full of tears. She said in her own voice in perfect English, so quietly that only he could hear it, "I have been watching you for 3 weeks." Elias did not say anything. He couldn't. "I have been paying for the food," she said, "since the 3rd week, anonymously." He still did not say anything. She held his eyes. "I did not come sooner because I was afraid." Of what? That my daughter's drawing was not real. He closed his eyes. He opened them. Araya Vess, Supreme Counselor of the Valinor Concordat, ruler of a civilization older than his species, was sitting on the floor of his makeshift shelter, holding her daughter, looking at him, crying. He didn't kneel. He didn't bow. He didn't know if he was supposed to. He walked to the counter of the makeshift kitchen. He pulled out a loaf of bread, sliced 2 pieces. He walked back to her. He knelt down, not because she was royalty, but because she was on the floor and he was standing. He held out the bread, 2 slices, on a napkin. He said very quietly, "You've been watching for 3 weeks. Silene says you haven't been sleeping either." Her mouth trembled. He kept his voice gentle. "So, eat something, and then we're going to talk about what happens next." She looked at the bread. She looked at him. She reached out, her small hand, younger looking than his, trembling. She took it. Araya Vess ate the bread slowly. She had probably not eaten in a day, maybe longer. She held it in both small hands, the way a person holds something they are not quite sure they are allowed to have. Elias watched her. He watched Silene curled against her mother's side, eyes closed, breathing evenly for the first time in weeks. He watched Araya's other hand rest gently on her daughter's back. He watched her chew and swallow and chew again. She looked 20. She could not be 20. He had done the math in his head 3 times in the last 4 minutes. Silene was 12. Araya was Selene's mother. Araya ruled a civilization, which meant Araya was. He didn't know. She could have been 90. She could have been 300. Velinor lived long. Velinor aged slowly. His tablet had told him that at midnight 2 weeks ago, and he had not thought anything of it then. He was thinking about it now. She finished the 2nd slice. She looked up at him. "Elias Brannock." "Yeah." "How old do you think I am?" "I." "Say it." 20, maybe." Her mouth did something that was almost a smile. "Not quite. I am 178 of your Earth years." "Okay, you are not surprised. I did the math." "You did the math?" "Twice." She looked at him, then she made a sound, a small breath of a sound, not a laugh, but close. "You are," she said, "not what I expected." "Yeah, I get that a lot lately." She looked down at Selene, at her daughter's small blue face. Her expression shifted, softened, went somewhere private. "She used to draw," she said so quietly Elias had to lean closer to hear. "When she was small, she used to draw everything. Her sister, her brother, the stars we could see from the diplomatic wing, our home garden on Velas." "Okay. I have not seen a drawing from her in 2 Earth years." He waited. 2 weeks ago, a drawing arrived in my private channel. Not through official routes, through the encrypted channel we set up when she was 6, in case she ever. Araya's voice caught. "In case she ever needed me." He kept quiet. The drawing was of a human man, in a small kitchen, with food on a counter, and a caption. There is a man on the moon who remembers we are hungry. Araya's eyes met his. Yes. Sileni told me just now. She would not have told you before. Why? Because she was afraid I would come and be disappointed and leave again. Elias closed his eyes. He opened them. He looked at the woman on the floor, who did not look like a supreme counselor, who looked like a very young mother who had lost her daughter for a while and was terrified she was going to lose her again. How long have you been watching? 3 weeks. You paid for the food, the supplies, the bribes to the supply depots to keep them open at odd hours. The rent on this space, yes, all of it. Why? Because I could not come myself. Why? She looked at him. Her eyes were full of a grief he recognized. Do you know how many of my people would have opposed me if I had come to a service tier caretaking site? No? Enough. She looked down at Silen. So I sent money, and I watched, and I read every report my aide could gather about the human food provider in the small diner. And I read every intercepted message that Seleni sent through the encrypted channel. And I saw. Araya's voice broke just for a beat. I saw my daughter beginning to speak like a person again. Not a delegate's child, a person. Elias sat down. He had to. His knees were done. He sat cross-legged on the floor across from her. You should have come sooner. Yes. You should have come the first day. Yes. Ilya almost died tonight. Araya's face went very still. Who is Ilya? He pointed at the crib in the corner, at the small sleeping shape under the blanket. Araya looked. She did not speak for a moment. Then she said quietly, she is very small. She's 4. She almost. Yes. Araya put her hand over her mouth again. She held it there for a long moment. Then she took it down. Elias Brannock. Yeah. Would you have hated me if I had appeared here 2 weeks ago and taken her away? Probably. Would you have been right to? He thought about it. He thought about it honestly. Yeah. Araya nodded. I did not come, she said, because I was building something else, in parallel. Something that would take longer, but that would matter more. What? A case before the assembly to reform the tier system, to make it impossible for what happened to Ilya to happen again. Have you? It is not finished. Araya. Yes. Ilya doesn't have time for you to finish a case. She looked at him. I know. She could have died tonight. I know. There are 3 graves already. She closed her eyes. She kept them closed for a long moment. When she opened them, the tears were back. Show me, she said. Show me all of them. He led her through the shelter. She walked past 42 sleeping children. She stopped at each one. She looked at each small face, each small 4-fingered hand curled on a blanket, each iridescent pattern rising and falling with quiet breath. She stopped the longest at Ilya's crib. She looked into it for almost a minute. Then very softly she reached in. She touched the small child's forehead. Ilya did not wake up. Araya's hand shook. This one? Yeah, she is. She's fine now. You saved her. I made her sick in the first place. Araya turned to him. How? He told her. He told her about Odrek, about the 24 hours, about the panic, about cutting the portion in half without thinking, about Ilya's small pale mouth and the drip of nutrition mixture, and the moment she swallowed for the first time. Araya listened. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she was quiet. Then she said in a voice he had not heard from her yet, Odrek. Yeah, Praetor Odrek. That's the one. Araya turned to one of her guards, still kneeling in the doorway. She spoke a single word in Valinor. The guard nodded once, stood, left. Araya turned back to Elias. He will not be a problem tomorrow. What are you going to? Nothing dramatic. He will be reassigned to a survey post in a system we barely visit. He will be alive, but he will not be here. Okay. That is the last time, Arya said. He will threaten a child in my delegation. She looked at Elias. There was something in her face he could not name. Elias Brannock. Yeah. You told him you would not stop feeding them. Yeah. Even though he could have destroyed you. Yeah. Why? He looked at her. He thought about it, really thought about it. Not the answer he'd give a stranger, the real one. Because I made a promise to a little girl once, that I'd be there in the morning to make her pancakes. Willa, you know her name. I read your file. Of course you did. I did not keep that promise, he said. He surprised himself by saying it out loud. He had never said it out loud. She died before morning, and I've spent 3 years learning that. That was not on me. It was a transit accident. It wasn't my fault. I couldn't have been there. I know all of that. He looked at Aurea. He looked past her, at the row of sleeping children, at Ilya's crib. But when Silen walked into my diner, and Ilya grabbed my leg and Tamsu ran to me, I understood something. That I have been trying to keep that promise. To every kid I meet, for 3 years, because I couldn't keep it to her. And so, he shrugged. I was going to feed them, whatever it cost, because it was the only thing I know how to do. Aurea was crying again, silently. She had not stopped. She reached across the space between them. She put her small hand on his knee. She did not speak. She did not have to. The assembly chamber was a cathedral of light. Elias stood at the base of the speaking platform, in his best shirt, which was still not very good, which he had bought in a hurry from a supply depot the day before. Above him, arranged in tiered galleries that rose like the inside of a shell, sat the representatives of 187 civilizations. He was going to speak to them in 14 minutes. His hands were shaking. Aurea was on the platform beside him, in her official regalia this time, the intricate metallic suit, the crystalline diadem, the formal cloak. She looked in this light more than 20. She looked ageless. She looked exactly what she was. She had told him what to say. She had spent the last 3 days coaching him. He didn't remember any of it. He was going to wing it. She looked at him. She saw his face. Her small hand, hidden by the fold of her sleeve, reached out, touched his hand just for a second. Elias Brannock. Yeah, you have fed 42 of my children. Yeah, you will do fine. Aurea. Yes. I might throw up. Her mouth did the almost smile. You will not. How do you? Because I am watching you, and Silen is watching you, and Ilya is watching you. She is in the observation gallery. Ilya is? Yes, in her best clothes, which we bought together yesterday. She insisted on yellow. Elias closed his eyes. He opened them. He walked up onto the platform. He looked out at the assembly. Beings he could not fully describe. Some humanoid. Some not. Some very much not. Silvery insectile envoys from the outer rim. A great glassy figure who was one of the meridian custodians. Rows and rows of faces and forms, every one of them watching him. He looked down at the notes he had written. He looked back up. He put the notes in his pocket. He said without preamble, I made lunch for some hungry kids. The chamber was very quiet. He waited. He waited 3 heartbeats. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's what I did. I run a diner on the moon. Some children came in. They were hungry. I fed them. Then more of them came, and I fed them too. And then I found out there were 42 of them, living in a storage bay, because the system said they weren't important enough to house properly. So I fed those 42 too. He looked around the chamber. I'm not a diplomat. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a philosopher. I'm a guy who cooks. So I don't have anything smart to say about your assembly or your policies or your treaties. All I can tell you is what I saw. He paused. He gathered himself. I saw a 16-year-old boy taking care of 41 children alone for 4 months without an adult to relieve him. He had rationed dispenser cubes in a determination that was going to break him. I saw a 4-year-old girl too weak to stand up because she'd been living on the minimum for so long that her body had forgotten how to grow. I saw a 12-year-old girl who taught herself to organize a black market food distribution operation because nobody else was going to. He swallowed. I saw 3 empty spaces where 3 small children used to be who did not survive long enough for me to meet them. The chamber was still. I am told that my species is being evaluated on its worthiness for full membership in this assembly. I am told that one of the concerns is whether humans can feel empathy for beings not of our own kind, whether we are in your language sufficiently advanced to care about strangers. He looked around. Let me tell you what I know about strangers. I don't. I don't know what a stranger is. When a child walks into my kitchen and says she is hungry, she stops being a stranger the moment I hear her stomach growl. That's not a human trait. That's just being alive in a universe where children exist. If your civilization is old enough and wise enough to have crossed the stars, and you have not yet figured out that a hungry child is a hungry child, no matter what star she was born under, then I am not sure what your wisdom is for. Somewhere in the upper galleries, a soft murmur. He kept going. I have been told that Valinor culture allocates resources by tier, that some children get more because their parents are more. I have been told this system is ancient, that it is sacred, that it is not for outsiders to question. He looked at Aurea. She was watching him, very still. I want to say something respectfully to the delegates of the Valinor Concordat, which is that your Supreme Counselor is currently working on legislation to end that system, which you may consider heresy, or you may consider progress. That is not my business, but I will tell you this. I have seen her hold her own daughter for the first time in more than a month, and she cried. I have seen her stand over a crib holding a 4-year-old service tier child who almost died on my watch, and she cried harder. She is not doing this because a human told her to. She is doing this because she is a mother, and because somewhere along the way she remembered. He turned back to the wider chamber. I don't know what humanity has to offer this assembly. I really don't. We're new, we're loud. We break things. We make bad decisions. We do a lot of things wrong. But I will tell you what we do sometimes. He held up his hands, his scarred chef's hands. We feed each other, all of each other. The little ones and the big ones, the ones like us and the ones not like us, the ones inside the walls and the ones outside them. We feed each other when we're winning. We feed each other when we're losing. We feed each other because we don't know what else to do. And sometimes that's not enough. But sometimes it turns out to be enough. Because a hungry child eats, and then she draws a picture, and then her mother sees it, and then the world changes. He looked at Aurea. He said softer, I made lunch for some hungry kids. That's all I did. And it changed everything. He looked back at the chamber. So, he shrugged. He was out of words. So, thank you for listening to the guy who cooks. The chamber was silent. It stayed silent for what felt like a long time. Then from the upper galleries, a slow sound started. Not applause, not the human kind, something else. A soft rhythmic tapping, feet against floor, hands against railings. A humming from the meridian custodian. A rising resonance from the insectile envoys in the rim tier. It grew. It filled the chamber. Aurea rose from her chair. She walked to the platform. She stood beside Elias. She did not speak yet. She turned to face the assembly. The chamber quieted. She lifted her chin. She said in her own voice, no translation pendant needed, I, Aurea Vest, Supreme Counselor of the Valinor Concordat, request formal recognition of Elias Brannock of Earth as one who has done more for the children of my delegation than my own delegation has done for them. A ripple went through the chamber. She kept going. I further request the immediate advancement of humanity to full participatory status in this assembly. Louder ripple. I further request the establishment of the Interspecies Child Welfare Initiative to be jointly led by human and Valinor representatives, with immediate effect. Its first priority to be a review of all delegation housing protocols across every assembly member state. Its second priority to be the establishment of guaranteed nutritional standards for all dependent children of all species, without regard to social tier. She paused. The chamber was completely silent. She said, I make these requests as Supreme Counselor, but I make them also as a mother, who nearly lost a daughter to a system that I inherited, and that I now have the responsibility, and the shame and the honor, to dismantle. She turned. She looked at Elias. She lowered her head, just slightly, a gesture no Valinor Supreme Counselor had made in 1100 years if the historians would later be believed. Then she turned back to the chamber. She waited. The vote came within 3 hours. It was not unanimous. Nothing in that chamber ever was. But it passed. Humanity was full status. The initiative was established. The tier system entered formal review. Elias sat in a small side chamber, on a bench, with his hands hanging between his knees, numb. Aurea sat beside him. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then he said without looking up, You knew that would work. I hoped. Hoped. Yes. Aurea. Yes. I want to ask you something. Yes. Am I a tool? She was quiet. He turned his head. You've been watching me for weeks. You paid for the food. You brought me here. You put me in front of the entire galaxy. Did you use me? She did not look away. Yes. He nodded. Yes, she said again. I used you. I saw what you were doing. I saw what my daughter had written. I understood 3 weeks ago that if I timed it correctly, your simple decency could be the fulcrum I needed to force through reforms that I have been trying to make for 20 of your years. I planned this, or I planned much of this. He nodded again. I want you to understand that I did not manufacture the situation. The situation was already there. You did what you did without knowing I existed. But, she took a breath. When I saw, I calculated, I directed, I chose the timing. I chose the venue. I sent Odrek's threats through channels I knew would provoke you, to make the drama louder, to ensure the vote would be closer to what I needed. He closed his eyes. Okay, you are angry. I don't know what I am. Elias Brannock. Yeah, look at me. He looked at her. Her eyes were steady. I used you, and I am not sorry that I used you, because I would use anything and anyone to save the children I have failed for 178 years, and I would do it again. Okay, but, he waited, but I want you to know something else. What? Everything you did without me. The lunches, the mornings at 3, the trip to the warehouse, the saving of Ilya, the kneeling on the quarter floor. Those were you. I did not orchestrate any of it. I could not have orchestrated any of it, because I did not know that human beings like you existed. I knew human beings existed. I did not know men like you existed. He looked at his hands. Aurea. Yes. I'm not a saint. I'm just... I know. I did it because I know. I did it because of Willa. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I know. She reached out, her small hand. She placed it on his. He looked at her. He said very quietly, I'm still angry. That is fair. I might be angry for a while. That is fair. But, yes, you saved 42 children in the process. We did. We did. He looked down at their hands, hers on his, small and blue, his large and scarred. He turned his hand over. He held hers back. Okay. The Ethics Council hearing was 3 days later. Odrek had filed his complaint before Araya could reassign him, as a last spiteful gesture, because he had always been that kind of man. Elias sat in a small chair at the base of another chamber, smaller than the assembly, colder, grayer. 15 delegates faced him. Half of them Valinor, half of them from other species. Audric was there, under guard. He had been officially placed under review pending reassignment, but he had been permitted to give his testimony. He gave it. He gave it well. He was smooth. He was calm. He described a lone widower, grieving, isolated. He described the food, the frequency of contact, the financial transactions. He implied, he suggested, he never said the ugly word out loud. He didn't have to. He described a broken man filling a hole in his soul with alien children. Elias sat there. He listened. At the end, one of the ethics delegates asked him if he wished to respond. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He tried again. He was going to say his line, the one he had rehearsed, about Marin, about Willa, about the promise of pancakes. He couldn't. His voice was gone. The chamber waited. He looked at the floor, ashamed, suddenly, ridiculously, in front of 15 alien delegates and his own government's observer and his own guilt. Ashamed that a smooth-tongued liar could reach into the worst wound of his life and use it against him. He could not speak. The delegate raised her voice. Mr. Brannock, do you wish to respond to Praetor Odrek's testimony? He shook his head. He couldn't. He could not. There was a movement, a small movement, at the back of the chamber. Dorvan stood up, the 16-year-old, in a plain uniform, his shoulders drawn back. He walked forward. The guards moved to stop him. The delegate held up her hand. Dorvan stopped at the podium. He was not authorized to speak. He spoke anyway. My name is Dorvan. I am service tier. I am not permitted to address this council. I do not care. The chamber was very still. For 4 months, I took care of 41 children in a storage bay. I did this because there was no one else. I did this while your government negotiated and decided that it was more important to argue about who would host the closing ceremony than to check whether the children of the cleaning staff had beds. He looked at Odrek. You, he said, you have never touched a child in your life. You have never held a small one when she cried. You have never washed a face. You have never sat up all night with a fever. Odrek's mouth opened. Elias Brannock has done all of these things, Dorvan said, for children who are not a species, without asking anything in return, without receiving anything in return. He has taught me to make bread. He has told me my work is important. He has laughed at my burnt loaves. Dorvan swallowed. He was the first adult in my life who did not treat me like a resource. He turned to face the delegates. If you punish him for what he has done, then I, Dorvan of the service tier of the Valinor Concordat, I will refuse to return to my delegation. I will not go home. I will stay. Where he is. Silence. Then movement. Sileni stood up. In the observation gallery, small, 12, in her formal dress, eyes bright. She said in her clear, translated voice, I stand with Dorvan. She sat down. Neareth stood. I stand with Dorvan. Tamsu stood. I stand with Dorvan. Kareth stood. Then Ilya, tiny 4 in her yellow dress, was helped to her feet by an older child. I stand with Dorvan, she said. Her small voice piped clear through the pendant. Deshi stood. Velen. Miro. Ika. Pow. They kept standing. They kept saying it. 42 children. 42 voices. In a chamber that had not heard the voice of a service tier child in 1100 years. They all said it. Every single one of them. Aurea, watching from the delegates' box, rose to her feet. She did not speak. She did not need to. She simply crossed the chamber. She walked to Elias. She took his hand in hers, small blue fingers around his large scarred ones. She turned to face the Ethics Council. She said in a voice that carried, "This man made a father of himself for my children when I could not, and the man who has stood behind our tier system for 140 years. She looked at Odrek, the man who threatened a 4-year-old with reassignment, because it was easier than admitting failure, has now attempted to smear a human being with the worst insult his imagination could produce. She turned back to the delegates. To insult Elias Brannock is to insult the Valinor bloodline, which he has protected, which we did not. She lifted her chin. I ask this council to close this matter, with prejudice, against Praetor Odrek. The chamber ruled in 9 minutes. Odrek was censured. Odrek was reassigned. Odrek was gone from the moon by nightfall. Elias did not remember most of the rest of that day. He remembered walking out into the hallway. He remembered Dorvin grabbing him, hugging him. He remembered Selene in her formal dress, no longer formal, throwing her arms around his waist. He remembered Ilya, yellow dress, small, reaching up. He picked her up. He held her. She put her cheek against his cheek. She said Fathai. The word wasn't necessary. He knew what it meant now. He held on to her. 6 months later. The copper kettle had changed. The old sign was still there. Elias had refused to replace it, but the space had tripled. The wall to the neighboring supply depot had come down. New booths, new kitchen, bright warm lighting, real windows now instead of a scratched view screen. Someone had painted the walls a warm cream color. Someone else had hung small copper pans along one wall for decoration. Photographs on the other wall. Elias with Silene on her 13th birthday, both of them holding up a lopsided cake. Elias teaching Dorvin how to laminate dough. Dorvin's brow furrowed in concentration. Elias and Ren arms slung around each other's shoulders, laughing at something the camera had not caught. Elias holding Ilya on his hip, both of them covered in flour. Ilya's mouth wide open in what was clearly a shriek of joy. Selene, Nereth, Tamsu, and Kareth on the floor of the diner, sorting through a box of dried apples, the tips of Nireth's small fingers stained brown from the fruit. Dorvin alone, in profile, holding a loaf of bread up to the light like a jeweler examining a stone. It was the first loaf he had made that Elias had called perfect. Kestrel and Ren at a booth mid-argument about something trivial, both of them grinning. The new sign on the back door of the diner said, Interspecies Child Welfare Initiative, Lunar City Office. Dorvin was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, yelling at a batch of croissants that were misbehaving. Ren was at the register, now formally the general manager, which had come with a raise that had allowed him to book his berth to Mars, which he had not used, because he had 6 months in decided he was more useful on the moon, which he had explained to Elias by shrugging and saying Rule 2. Elias was in the back office, reading a report. The report said that the tier system had been formally dismantled in 3 subsystems, that 14 more subsystems had begun formal review, that guaranteed nutritional standards for all Valinor children had passed unanimously, that similar programs were being adopted in 17 other species territories. The report also said that Ilya had gained 3 pounds since April. He read that part twice. He set the report down. He looked at the wall of photographs. Ilya's photograph was in the center, not because he had put it there deliberately, because that was the wall she pointed to when she came into the diner, and she had at some point in the last 3 months developed the habit of climbing onto a chair and rearranging the photographs whenever she felt they were not correctly organized. Elias had stopped rearranging them back. She had put herself in the middle. He didn't disagree with her. The chime bird choked. He had oiled it 3 months ago. It still made the sound. He couldn't bring himself to fix it. It was part of the place. He looked up. Aurea was walking through the door. She wore civilian clothes, a soft blue jacket, simple boots, hair loose around her shoulders. She looked in this light like exactly what her body suggested she was. A young woman, 20 if you were guessing. She wasn't. She was 178. But she came to the diner in civilian clothes now, because she wanted to, because she came for breakfast most Sundays, because she said quietly only to him one morning 3 months ago that this was the closest thing to a home she had ever known. He stood up. He walked out of the office. He stopped at the counter. She sat on a stool. Same stool she always chose. Same one Selene had first sat on. He had realized that after her third visit. He had not mentioned it. Morning, Araya. Good morning, Elias Brannock. Coffee. Please, he poured. She wrapped her small blue hands around the mug. She looked at him. How is Ilya? Growing. Selene. Insufferable. She's 13 now. She's decided she doesn't want to be a Valinor Supreme Counselor. She wants to be a chef. Araya made the almost smile. How dreadful. She said her mother could do the politics for a bit longer. She has more important things to learn. Such as? Such as pie crust. Araya laughed. It was a real laugh this time. Not a breath, not an almost. A laugh. He watched her. He turned to the kitchen, called back. Dorvan, 2 apple pies on the counter. The good ones. Dorvan's voice came back. The good ones cost more. Charge me. Boss? Charge me, Dorvan. Dorvan came out with 2 small pies. Warm, steam rising, the lattice on top perfect. He had learned. In 6 months. He had really learned. He set them on the counter. He looked at Araya. He was almost 17 now. Supreme Counselor. Dorvan. Are you well? I am. Are you? I am. He looked at his hands. His flour-dusted hands. Elias says I might be ready to make the wedding cake soon. Araya's eyes flickered. She looked at Elias. Elias felt his face get warm. Which wedding cakes? Araya said. Dorvan looked at Elias. Dorvan looked at Araya. Dorvan realized. Dorvan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it, closed it. In general, for weddings that might happen, in the future, to anyone, in principle. He walked briskly back to the kitchen. Elias could hear him swearing softly in Valinor. Araya looked at Elias. Wedding cakes. He was just, in general. Araya. In principle. Araya. She was smiling. The full smile. The one that reached her eyes, which was still 6 months and the most startling thing he had ever seen. She was smiling and looking at him. He was 35. She looked 20. She was 178. They had actually known each other for 6 months. He had a life on the moon, and she had a concordat, and there were reasons this was complicated. He looked at her. She looked at him. She reached across the counter. She took his hand. She said, perhaps someday, in principle. Araya. Yes. I've barely. I know. I don't. I know. But, yes. Someday. Someday. In principle. He held her hand a moment longer than he had ever held it before. Then he let go. He gave her a pie. He gave himself a pie. They ate. She left a little after noon. She kissed the top of his hand at the door quickly in a way that was almost casual and not casual at all. She said she would see him Sunday. He said Sunday. She went. Later. After the lunch rush. After Dorvan closed the kitchen. After Ren locked the front door and waved goodnight through the glass. After Selene came by with her siblings and Ilya, who now had actual hair past her shoulders in Valinor beads. And they had all had dinner. And Selene had insisted on making the vegetables herself. And they had been perfect. And Ilya had fallen asleep on Elias's shoulder halfway through dessert. And Araya had come back to collect them and had smiled the whole time she was there. After all of that. Elias closed up the diner alone. He wiped the counter. The last customer of the day was gone. The lights were low. Outside the new picture window, earth hung in the black sky. small, blue, wrapped in its familiar clouds. He could see faintly the curve of North America. Somewhere on that curve was a small graveyard where Myron and Willa were buried. He had been back once 2 years ago. He hadn't been able to stay long. He crossed to the shelf. The photograph was still there. Myron laughing, Willa in her lap. Yellow, both of them. That yellow they used to love. He picked it up. He held it a long time. He said very quietly, so quietly he wasn't sure he said it out loud. There are 42 of them, sweetheart, and they eat pancakes on Sundays. He said, I made it to the morning, Willa. It just took a while. He said, and this time he was talking to Myron, I'm still going to love you. Okay, that doesn't go away. But my heart came back online, and I think you'd like her. She works too hard. She thinks too much. She has a laugh that starts small. She reminds me. She reminds me that people can grow, even old ones, even sad ones. He kissed his fingertips, pressed them to the glass of the photo, set it back on the shelf, turned around. The diner was quiet, warm, full of the smells of a day of feeding people, bread and cinnamon and coffee, and the faint sweetness of Dorvan's cooling pies. He looked at the door, at the new sign under the old one. Interspecies Child Welfare Initiative, Lunar City Office. He looked at the wall of photographs, at 42 small faces he could name in his sleep, at Elia in yellow, at Silene with flour on her nose, at Dorvan holding a loaf of bread, at Wren laughing so hard his eyes had closed. He said to himself, to no one, to everyone, I made lunch for some hungry kids. He turned off the lights. He locked the door. He went home, under earth, under the black sky, under a moon that had once 6 months ago held a diner that was going to close. He walked home under it, alive.